I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery chewing through my land like a giant metal termite. At first, I thought maybe a neighbor was doing early morning construction. Maybe a busted water line or something serious. But then I noticed something very, very wrong. The sound wasn't coming from anyone else's property. It was coming from the north pasture. My pasture. The part of my ranch that hadn't been touched in weeks except by my goats and the occasional wind-blown tumbleweed. I threw on jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt still covered in last night's chilly stains and ran out the door, praying I was hallucinating. I wasn't. A bright yellow backhoe, operated by what looked like a shirtless college dropout in flip-flops and sunglasses, was halfway through carving a massive crater right in the middle of my land. Standing next to him, clipboard in hand, was a woman in tennis whites with the expression of someone judging a wine tasting. She didn't flinch when I approached screaming. She didn't even blink. She just looked up at me with a smirk and said, "Good morning. You're just in time to see the pond layout. Isn't it stunning?" I thought I'd misheard her. "The what?" "The pond," she said, gesturing with her clipboard like she was unveiling a masterpiece. "For the HOA beautification project. We're turning this unsightly field into a nature oasis." I blinked, too stunned to speak. This wasn't just a case of mistaken property lines. My land is clearly fenced. I have property markers. Hell, there's even a private ranch, no trespassing sign by the gate. I finally managed, "Lady, this is my land." She actually laughed. "Well, technically the soil line is ambiguous, but I'm sure the HOA can clear it up. We've got landscapers scheduled for Friday, and the fish delivery is set for Monday." "Fish?" She said fish. I looked at the guy in the backhoe, who gave me a thumbs up and shouted over the rumble of the engine, "Koi pond, bro." My blood pressure hit a new milestone. I demanded names, titles, credentials. That's when she introduced herself as Karen McMillan, president of the Hidden Bluffs HOA. The Hidden Bluffs HOA is a cluster of expensive tract homes half a mile south of my property line. They have no jurisdiction here. No claim. No right-of-way. Nothing. Karen insisted the HOA had done the research and read online that parts of my property were common use because of an old survey error. I asked her for documentation. She said she left it in her Tesla. I asked her to get off my land. She said I was being aggressive. I said I was 2 seconds from calling the sheriff. She rolled her eyes and called me a rural extremist. So I called the sheriff. The deputy showed up 40 minutes later, looked at the hole in the ground, looked at Karen, looked at me, and sighed like this was his third Karen incident of the week. He told them to cease all digging until land ownership was confirmed, and Karen acted like he'd just outlawed her birthday. That should have been the end of it. I went inside, thinking at least some common sense had prevailed. I planned to call my lawyer in the morning and get paperwork rolling. But at 2:03 a.m., the world exploded. I was jolted awake by the sound of a blast that shook the walls and lit the sky outside my window a blinding orange. For a split second, I thought the world was ending. Then I smelled it, gas. Not the kind from your stove. The kind that takes out neighborhoods. I ran outside and saw it, flames roaring into the sky, sirens wailing in the distance, and smoke billowing from the exact spot Karen had been digging. They'd come back, in the dead of night, and they hit a pressurized natural gas pipeline buried deep beneath my land. By the time the fire was under control, every emergency service in the county, and half the state, was parked on my ranch. Hazmat, state troopers, pipeline engineers, news vans. Karen, wrapped in a pink robe and holding a Starbucks cup, tried to tell the fire captain that this was all a minor landscaping mistake. I told the fire captain everything. He didn't look amused. Neither did the state engineer when I showed him a letter I'd received 6 years ago confirming the presence of the pipeline and our legal obligations around it. Karen stood next to me and muttered, "You really should have put up a sign or something." I looked at her. Karen. There was a literal sign. It said danger, gas pipeline in red. she sniffed. I thought that was an old warning. Like those fake dog ones. And that's when I realized. This wasn't over. This wasn't even close. The morning after the explosion, my ranch looked like a scene from a disaster movie, minus the Hollywood budget and plus a few dozen furious state officials. The gas company had cordoned off the crater with hazard tape. Several firefighters were still monitoring the smoldering remnants of the burst pipeline, and the news vans parked outside looked like vultures circling a carcass. And in the middle of it all, Karen McMillan, draped in what I could only describe as a spa robe made entirely of entitlement, was sipping a kale smoothie and directing her board members like they were prepping for a bake sale. She actually had the audacity to call the whole thing a slight overreaction, and asked a paramedic if they could speed it up so she wouldn't miss her Pilates class. I wasn't even surprised anymore. What did surprise me was how fast Karen pivoted into gaslighting mode, pun fully intended. Within 12 hours, I received a formal letter from the Hidden Bluffs HOA attorney accusing me of negligence. According to them, it was my fault the pipeline was hit because I hadn't properly fenced it, hadn't posted adequate signage, and had allowed the land to appear unused and unclaimed. Yes, you read that right. They were blaming me for not making it clear enough that they shouldn't dig a giant pond on land that wasn't theirs. The kicker? Karen attached photos she took from inside my own property to show that no clear boundary existed. She zoomed in on a faded no trespassing sign, circled the rust marks, and labeled it legally unclear. I called my lawyer, Sam, who I've known since high school and who once argued a case about chicken custody during a divorce. He read the letter and laughed so hard I thought he was going to dislocate something. Then he got serious. We're going nuclear. Sam helped me pull together every document we had. Land surveys, deed history, drone footage showing the fencing, time-stamped trail cam photos of Karen's crew sneaking back onto the property at midnight. But the crown jewel was the official notice from the State Gas Infrastructure Department from 6 years ago, warning me to never dig more than a foot deep in that section of land. The notice was registered, confirmed, and signed by the same state engineer who showed up during the explosion, and he was not amused. We sent everything to the HOA's legal team, assuming they'd back down now that the reality of their idiocy was so thoroughly documented. Instead, Karen doubled down. Her response? You know how tricky rural zoning can be. She said that to the state engineer. While on camera. During a press conference. The following day, I got a call from Channel 7 News. A reporter named Melissa wanted to do a segment called Gaslighting the Community. I invited her out. She showed up with a camera crew and walked the property with me, noting every sign, every barrier, and every scorched piece of evidence that screamed, this was entirely preventable. She even caught Karen on camera yelling at the fire inspector, claiming the explosion was just gas doing what gas does. The segment aired that night. Karen's smug face was plastered on screens across the county under a banner that read, HOA President Destroys Pipeline in Pond Project Gone Wrong. The footage went viral. Within 48 hours, the HOA's Facebook page was locked, the neighborhood's Yelp page got spammed with koi pond memes, and someone created a parody Twitter account called Pond Queen Karen that posted daily inspirational quotes like, if you don't own the land, manifest that you do. But while the internet laughed, the state didn't. The pipeline company filed an emergency injunction against the HOA and began prepping a lawsuit. And as if that wasn't bad enough, a county surveyor showed up at my gate with news that made my blood boil. Apparently, the HOA had been quietly submitting altered easement claims to the county recorder's office for months. One of those claims overlapped with my northern pasture, the exact area they dug up. So this wasn't just idiocy. It was fraud. The kind that comes with real consequences. Sam filed an immediate countersuit accusing the HOA of criminal trespassing, endangering public safety, and submitting falsified documents. We submitted every fake easement with Karen's signature at the bottom. Karen's response? She held a press conference on her front lawn wearing a sun hat and accused me of forging the easements to discredit her leadership. She claimed to be the victim of a deep ranch conspiracy. Meanwhile, the HOA was unraveling like a cheap patio umbrella in a windstorm. Homeowners started complaining that their dues had tripled overnight. Some of them hadn't even known about the pond project until it showed up in the news. One guy, Greg, I think, cornered Karen outside the community center and demanded to see the budget. She told him, quote, "I'll show you the numbers when I'm good and ready," which only added gasoline to the already smoldering dumpster fire. At the next HOA meeting, which I watched gleefully online, half the board resigned mid-sentence. One guy screamed, "You made us co-sign for a koi pond and now we're all gonna get sued into oblivion." Karen tried to restore order, calling the exodus a cleansing of negative energy, but her lavender-scented leadership routine wasn't fooling anyone anymore. As the HOA flailed, the State Pipeline Authority launched a full investigation. The damages were estimated in the millions. Cleanup alone was pushing $500,000, and the environmental impact report hadn't even come in yet. I cooperated fully, providing all documentation and access to the land, while Karen sent them a handwritten letter accusing me of bullying her aura. To make matters worse for her, the HOA's insurance provider declined coverage. Apparently, blatant illegal digging on non-owned property resulting in statewide emergency wasn't part of the standard policy. Without insurance, they were wide open to civil penalties and personal lawsuit. That's when Karen tried to pivot her story. Suddenly, she claimed she wasn't even involved in the decision to dig. She blamed the vice president of the HOA, a man named Brett, who until now had been mostly silent and mostly stoned. Brett looked like a deer caught in a spotlight and immediately panicked. He gave a sworn statement throwing Karen under the bus faster than a malfunctioning Segway. He said she orchestrated the entire thing and called it her visionary gift to the community. With Brett's statement, everything changed. The county prosecutor got involved. Karen was now facing not just civil liability, but possible criminal charges: fraud, endangerment, falsification of document. Her days of sipping smoothies in silk robes were about to be replaced with court dates and subpoenas. And just when I thought it couldn't get any wilder, I got a visit from the Department of Environmental Quality. They had some questions for Karen, because it turns out building a pond that large, especially on land not zoned for it, violated state conservation laws. This wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was about to become a spectacle. By the time Chapter 3 began, metaphorically and legally, Karen had gone from self-appointed pond queen to the starring defendant in 3 different lawsuits, 1 civil inquiry, and now an environmental violation investigation that made the HOA's legal exposure feel like a ticking time bomb. But even as the walls closed in, Karen's strategy remained the same: deny everything, blame everyone, and fake an injury for sympathy. And I mean that literally. The morning of the first civil court appearance, Karen arrived in a neck brace. Not because of the pipeline blast, which she was nowhere near when it erupted, but allegedly due to the psychosomatic strain of rural aggression. She claimed she developed the neck injury from the sheer tension of being verbally assaulted by angry ranchers, which apparently included me staring at her too hard during a zoning hearing. She wheeled herself into the courtroom like a dollar store soap opera villain and gave a dramatically whispered testimony about land trauma and the emotional weight of beautifying an ungrateful landscape. My lawyer Sam nearly popped a blood vessel trying not to laugh. We countered with drone footage showing her walking upright and healthy the same morning she claimed to be bedridden. The footage included her arguing with a DoorDash driver and waving her arms at him because he forgot the extra aioli for her salad. The judge was not amused by her miraculous before-the-brace mobility and strongly advised her legal team to consider the direction this case is trending. But Karen was determined. Her new lawyer, an oily guy named Sheldon who looked like he moonlighted as a sleazy game show host, presented an argument so absurd that even the stenographer looked confused. Sheldon claimed that I had effectively abandoned my land by failing to incorporate it into a recognized community association. According to him, land that isn't developed under an HOA framework becomes vulnerable to civil community stewardship. That's right. He actually said community stewardship was a legal reason to start digging ponds on private ranchland. Sam shredded that nonsense in less than 10 minutes by referencing centuries-old property law and bringing up my clear title, tax history, and recent federal land certification related to the state pipeline. The judge ruled the HOA had no standing whatsoever to claim rights to my land and ordered a full audit of their operations. Now that the HOA was legally cornered, they shifted tactic. Brett, the board VP turned snitch, went full rogue and started cooperating with our side. He handed over a flash drive containing emails, text messages, and even HOA Zoom meeting recordings. What we uncovered made my jaw drop. Months before the digging began, Karen had circulated a document titled Project Liilipad, which included detailed pond schematics, landscaping renderings, a fish import schedule, and a fundraising plan that involved increasing HOA dues under the fake category of streetlight improvement. The most damning part? A memo from Karen stating, "If we don't have legal access, we'll create a pathway by declaring an easement retroactively. No one will challenge it, it's just scrubland." That scrubland was my pasture. My goat-occupied, working, tax-paying, legally zoned pasture. It got worse. Brett also revealed Karen had offered free landscaping to a county clerk's cousin in exchange for ignoring inconsistencies in the easement paperwork. That county clerk was later fired when the emails surfaced, and Karen claimed she had no idea how her enthusiasm became misinterpreted. With that evidence submitted, the judge fast-tracked the pipeline company's lawsuit and referred the case for criminal review. By now, the court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. The news outlets hounded her. Protesters showed up outside HOA meetings with cardboard koi fish signs that read, "Karen lied, we fried." One teenager dressed as a koi pond for Halloween and made the local paper. Karen, of course, blamed me for everything. She called another press conference, this time on the courthouse steps, and tearfully claimed I was waging a personal vendetta against women in leadership. She accused me of being anti-fish, anti-community, and anti-progress. Sam and I watched from across the street with coffee and bagels, silently rating her performance. We both gave it a solid 3 out of 10. Too much mascara, not enough logic. Behind the scenes, I kept moving my pieces on the board. With Karen now radioactive, HOA members were begging me to negotiate a truce. One even showed up at my gate with cookies and a heartfelt apology. I told them I wasn't interested in cookies, I wanted accountability. And so, they ousted Karen in a community vote so dramatic it needed a live stream. She stormed out of the meeting mid-vote, yelling that she was being cancelled by goats and gossip. But her removal didn't stop the consequences. The pipeline company's lawyers filed a motion demanding full restitution for damages and lost operations. Their lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Granger with a courtroom presence like a guillotine, laid it out clearly in court. The HOA's unauthorized dig had risked lives, interrupted fuel services across 3 counties, and potentially contaminated groundwater. The claim, $2.6 million in damages. And then came the knockout blow. Remember that zoning clause I mentioned? Turns out my ranch had been included in a special agricultural preservation zone established 5 years ago to protect critical infrastructure areas, including the pipeline corridor. That made any non-agricultural development without explicit approval a Class B environmental violation. And the HOA's unauthorized excavation not only breached zoning but triggered penalties tied to protected land usage. The Department of Environmental Quality launched its own suit. In total, Karen and her HOA were now facing 3 concurrent legal battles. My civil trespass case, the pipeline company's corporate lawsuit, and the Environmental Commission's regulatory complaint. It was a buffet of consequences, and they were forced to eat every course. That's when Karen tried her final trick. She had her lawyer email me a settlement offer proposing to pay me $10,000, issue a public apology, and let me join the HOA board as a liaison for rural affairs. Attached to the offer was a draft apology letter that began with, "To whom it may concern, feelings may have been hurt." I couldn't make this stuff up. I rejected the offer immediately, and forwarded the entire thing to the state attorney's office and the press. Karen's pathetic olive branch made headlines again, this time under the glorious headline, "HOA Queen Tries to Bribe Rancher with Feelings May Have Been Hurt Letter." The fallout was glorious. HOA members began resigning en masse. Lawsuits drained the HOA's reserves. Homeowners started filing their own claims against the board for misuse of dues. Karen was served with a formal summons on a local morning show, live on air. She claimed she thought it was a fan letter. Even then, she refused to admit guilt. She went on social media and announced she was pivoting to holistic healing, then posted a photo of herself in front of a koi pond in Arizona with the caption, "Manifesting Peace Through Aquatic Synergy." But back here in the real world, synergy wasn't going to stop what was coming. Because I had one more card to play. The HOA had always treated their operations like they were untouchable. They thought they could sneak around zoning laws, fake easements, and bulldoze over legal boundaries. Literally. But they never anticipated that the guy in flannel boots with goats and a plot of dirt would outmaneuver them. And now that the lawsuits had cracked open their books, I was going to bury them with their own paperwork. There's a special kind of silence that settles over a sinking ship. That's exactly what it felt like in Hidden Bluffs the week after Karen's public bribery attempt made headlines. Residents who used to boast about their elevated HOA lifestyle were now attending emergency meetings in lawn chairs, demanding refunds for koi that would never arrive and wondering if their homes would be seized to pay for a gas pipeline inferno. The board had been gutted, Karen had gone into public relations hiding, and I was just getting started. The thing about Karen and her cronies is that they'd operated on ego, not intelligence. In the mess of fraudulent paperwork, shady easement claims, and leaked emails, there was one thread Sam and I hadn't pulled yet. The HOA's finances. And thanks to court-mandated discovery, we had full access. Sam brought over a banker's box stuffed with HOA records and set it on my kitchen table like it was the holy grail of idiocy. We cracked it open like it was Christmas. The very first document we found was a handwritten ledger labeled Karen's Vision Budget, complete with doodles of water lilies and hearts. It wasn't just bad accounting, it was evidence of absolute madness. For instance, Karen had billed the HOA $8,732 for aquatic ambience consultation. The vendor? A Reiki healer from Sedona named Moonbeam, who had no landscaping license but plenty of opinions about water energy. There were also multiple receipts for luxury spa days, labeled under mental wellness retreats for board cohesion. And then the most ridiculous line of all, $4, $9.90, ceremonial koi blessing supplies. What the hell is a ceremonial koi blessing? Sam chuckled and muttered, "She's cooked." We compiled everything into a report and sent it to the HOA's remaining legal counsel, the state attorney general, and just for fun, the press. Local media had a field day. One news anchor even did a segment from a mock koi pond made of inflatable fish and garden hoses, announcing, "Today in Pond Politics, Karen's fish fantasy flounders." But I wasn't done. While Sam handled the civil chaos, I turned my focus to the zoning disaster. My ranch, as it turns out, wasn't just under agricultural protection. It was one of only 3 properties in the county acting as a buffer zone around critical energy infrastructure. That meant the illegal dig hadn't just violated a random ordinance, it had breached a state safety perimeter. The Department of Environmental Quality had already launched an investigation, but with Karen's financial records now exposed, I decided to tip off someone else, the Office of the Inspector General. A week later, a very serious woman in a gray blazer knocked on my door. She was with the OIG and she wanted a walkthrough. I gave her the full tour: charred pasture, broken fencing, burned hay bales, and the crater that looked like a meteor had drop-kicked my property. She took notes, asked sharp questions, and left without a smile. That was a good sign. By now, Karen was circling the drain. Her house had been listed for sale under a fake name, K. Marshall, but her garish landscaping and live, laugh, lake, lawn sign gave her away. I sent the listing to a few well-placed contacts at the local zoning board and let nature take its course. Within days, inspectors found multiple code violations on her property, including an unpermitted deck, a blocked drainage easement, and, ironically, a koi pond filtration system that wasn't to code. At the same time, the HOA insurance policy collapsed. After months of stonewalling, their provider released a final statement. All claims related to the pipeline incident were excluded under the Intentional Illegal Acts clause. That meant no defense coverage, no liability protection, and no payout. Every cent would come out of HOA funds, or worse, the personal assets of board members. The panic began almost instantly. Homeowners demanded audit. Some threatened to sue the board themselves. Karen, now completely isolated, tried one last desperate maneuver. She filed a restraining order against me, claiming I was emotionally menacing her through litigation and community instability. The judge threw it out before I even had to respond. The statement on the dismissal read, "Legal accountability is not harassment." Then came the best moment of the entire saga. The pipeline company's lead attorney, Granger, called me personally. After confirming with state officials and reviewing the environmental damage, they had decided to go after Karen's personal assets, including her home. But here's where it got interesting. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings due to missed payment. Karen hadn't just lost her position and her reputation. She was losing her house too. I asked Granger to send me the foreclosure notice. I didn't need it legally. I just wanted to frame it. The property went up for auction 3 weeks later. It was a quiet, awkward affair held in the county courthouse, attended mostly by real estate agents and nosy neighbors. Karen didn't show. Rumor was she had moved in with a cousin out of state to heal spiritually. The bidding started low, $150,000 for a 3-bed McMansion in a now toxic HOA. When the auctioneer asked for opening bids, I raised my hand and offered cash. I bought it for $218,000. The same house Karen had ruled from like a suburban dictator. The same driveway she stood on to scream at me for soil theft. The same koi-less backyard where she held HOA yoga sessions in Lululemon with a megaphone. And now it was mine. The closing paperwork took 2 weeks. The moment I got the keys, I invited Sam and Granger over for drink. We toasted on Karen's former patio. I even wore one of her forgotten sun hats that I found in a closet. Sam dared me to turn it into an Airbnb. Granger joked we should build an actual pond, just so long as it wasn't near a pipeline. But I had other plans. I turned Karen's old property into the Pipeline Safety Awareness Center, a tongue-in-cheek but fully functional educational site where local schools could learn about property law, zoning, and infrastructure hazard. The crater replica was a highlight. I built it in her backyard using non-functional gas piping, fake flames, and a life-sized cardboard cutout of Karen Midscream. It was glorious. There was even a garden plaque that read, "Dedicated to those who dig before they check." Visitors loved it. The story had gone viral months ago, and people came from out of town to see the house that caused a statewide emergency. I didn't charge them, but donations poured in. Enough to fund fencing upgrades, repair my pasture, and buy a state-of-the-art drone system to monitor the rest of my land for trespassers. It was the long game, and I'd played it perfectly. As for Karen, She tried to re-enter public life under a new identity as a wellness consultant. Her Instagram account, @LakeEnergyMama, featured posts about hydraulic trauma and how masculine legal systems suppress fluid intuition. I didn't follow, but friends kept me updated. At one point, she posted a photo of her holding a goldfish with the caption, "Starting again, one miracle at a time." I left a comment, "Make sure to check for gas lines this time." She blocked me within 5 minutes. In the end, I didn't need revenge through violence, threats, or drama. Karen had built her downfall with her own hands and a rented backhoe. All I did was shine a light on it. Her entitlement, arrogance, and need for control had collided with state infrastructure, and I was just smart enough to step back and let the consequences do the digging. Sometimes karma doesn't knock. Sometimes it digs a pond and hits a pipeline. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole debacle, it's that justice doesn't always come with trumpets or fanfare. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a city inspector handing you a zoning violation report with your enemy's name misspelled. Sometimes it looks like a cardboard cutout of a woman in a sun hat standing next to a crater labeled Karen's Legacy. And sometimes it smells faintly of charred turf and koi food. The Pipeline Safety Awareness Center, formerly known as Karen McMillan's personal palace of HOA tyranny, had become something of a local legend. On weekends, buses of high school kids pulled into the driveway for safety field trip. Teachers took photos beside the caution tape I left around the recreated dig site. I had plaques made for every stage of Karen's downfall, each one etched with dates, screenshots of news headlines, and the most outrageous quotes from her emails. My personal favorite? I don't recognize that soil's independence. Visitors loved the dark humor. Some came for the schadenfreude, others out of genuine concern about infrastructure safety. But the most satisfying guests were the former HOA members who, months earlier, had backed Karen without hesitation. Now they came sheepishly, hats in hand, asking if I'd consider rebuilding bridges. I smiled politely and told them the only bridges I was building were metaphorical ones, over ponds they'd never dig again. Financially, I was better off than I'd ever been. The viral coverage had drawn donations from environmental watchdogs and infrastructure advocacy groups. Even the state energy department sent a commendation letter, thanking me for helping expose the gaps in local zoning enforcement and educating the public. I hung it in the foyer. Right above Karen's old home is where the heart is wall decal, which I left there as a reminder of what delusion looks like in vinyl cursive. And yes, I finally built a pond. A real one. On my land. But mine wasn't filled with koi or lilies. I stocked it with snapping turtles. The big, prehistoric-looking ones with jaws like garden shears and zero tolerance for trespassers. I called it the perimeter pond, and it had motion sensor sprinklers hidden in the brush just for fun. Anyone who got too close got a surprise shower. One delivery driver found out the hard way and left laughing. Karen, I imagine, would have called it an act of domestic aggression. There were still a few legal threads to tie up. The state completed its investigation and issued fines so large that the remnants of the Hidden Bluffs HOA officially dissolved. Karen, facing mounting personal liability, tried to file for bankruptcy, but the court rejected it on the grounds of fraud. That meant her assets, including her failed consulting business, her SUV, and even the frozen koi food still sitting in her garage freezer, were all fair game for liquidation. Her house, as you know, belonged to me now. Her old HOA board members? Scattered. Some fled the state, others moved in with family, a few banded together in what I heard was an attempt to start a new HOA in a retirement community. I chuckled at the thought of their first meeting being interrupted by a swarm of mobility scooters demanding transparency. As for Karen herself, she vanished for a time. No Instagram posts, no news appearances, no more herbal detox product promotions. But like all entitled people who think consequences are a temporary inconvenience, she eventually resurfaced, this time in a YouTube video titled, From Trauma to Tranquility, My Journey Beyond the Pipeline. I watched it out of morbid curiosity. It opened with ambient pan flute music and Karen sitting in a garden next to a kiddie pool, wearing a linen tunic and talking about how society punishes women with vision. She claimed her persecution was the result of structural masculinity embedded in earth-based property laws, and compared her pond dream to the works of Georgia O'Keeffe. She even referred to herself as a land empath. The video had comments disabled, probably for the best. I considered suing her for defamation after she implied I had weaponized goats, but I let it slide. She had no money left. Besides, the best revenge was already playing out in full color every time someone drove past her former McMansion and saw a sign that read, "Warning. State Pipeline Buffer Zone, do not dig." Right under it, I added a smaller sign that said, "Seriously, Karen." The real payoff, though, came quietly. 6 months after the lawsuits wrapped and the property was officially mine, I was invited to speak at the State Infrastructure and Environmental Planning Summit. They wanted me to tell my story, not just as a victim of HOA overreach, but as a landowner who stood up to institutional arrogance and reckless entitlement. I showed up in boots, flannel, and a BOLO tie, and delivered a calm, sarcastic, truth-laced presentation that got 3 standing ovations and a job offer I didn't expect. Apparently, the Department of Environmental Quality wanted to create a rural outreach task force to prevent disasters like the Karen Pond crisis from happening again. They asked me to lead it. I said yes on the spot. That's how I ended up as the state's unofficial HOA whisperer, traveling to small towns, ranches, and rural communities, educating people on land rights, infrastructure boundaries, and how to deal with overreaching HOAs before someone decides to build a koi pond on a gas line. They even printed safety flyers with a caricature of me holding a shovel and a gas detector. The tagline? "Don't be like Karen." The legacy of hidden bluffs faded into folklore. Realtors stopped mentioning the HOA entirely when trying to sell homes in the area. Buyers would Google the address, stumble on the pipeline pond story, and pass without even scheduling a viewing. One resident allegedly carved, "Karen ruined everything" into the clubhouse piano before moving out. People still send me messages, some thanking me for standing my ground, others sharing their own horror stories with deranged HOA boards. Apparently, the Karen strain is more widespread than I thought. But what gives me hope is how many people are now aware, alert, and a lot more skeptical when someone in a pantsuit starts talking about communal vision. And as for my ranch, it's never been more peaceful. The pastures recovered, the fences are stronger, and the goats are thriving. Sometimes I stand out by the new pond and watch the turtles sun themselves on the rock. There's no more trespassing, no backhoes, and definitely no koi. I added a new sign at the front gate. It says, "Private ranch, no trespassing, no koi, no Karens." I still get a kick out of watching delivery drivers pause to read it, nod slowly, and drive on. There's a justice in that. Not loud, not flashy, just quiet, undeniable, and earned. Because Karen thought she could dig into my land, fake some paperwork, and ride her HOA crown into a fantasy pond kingdom. Instead, she triggered a statewide emergency, imploded her HOA, lost her home, became a cautionary tale on national television, and handed me the shovel to bury her empire. All because she didn't ask permission. All because she thought ownership was just a matter of confidence. In the end, the land doesn't lie. But it sure can blow up in your face, especially when there's a pipeline running under it.